Welcome! Thank you so much for joining me on the Socially Delightful podcast. I'm Jewel, human connection enthusiast and your host, and this show is all about delighting in yourself, delighting in socializing and in others, and creating truly supportive, delightful friendships and relationships, even in our modern world with our modern stress. In this podcast, we have fun creating a new culture of living in social delight. Now let's dive into how we're going to do that today. Today I'm going to be telling a story about my failed attempt at making new friends and why this attempt did fail. Super fun. So this is the slightly embarrassing, slightly sad, but with a very happy ending story of how I was trying to trauma dump my way into best friendships. So in order to really tell this story and all of its lack of glory, I also have to share with you about what I thought friendship was and what it actually is. We need to talk about the things that were blocking me from having the friendships that I wanted. And we got to talk about the science of meaningful friendships. We got to talk about vulnerability and what it actually is. There are 4 types of vulnerability. Stay tuned. And we're going to be talking about how to create a best friendship. And I'm going to give you a hack to help speed up your friendship process. It sounds so wild, but to say out loud. But I'm going to give you some hacks that will help you speed up the friendship process to really creating a meaningful bond, a best friendship. So basically today I'm like Oprah giving out goodies, friendship goodies, because this podcast is loaded today. And I'm truly so excited for this episode because this is something I did and struggled with for so long, this phenomenon of trying to trauma dump your way into a best friendship. And no one really talks about it. And it's something that I see a lot of women doing to really set the scene. We're taking it all the way back to 2015. Which, wow, this was almost 10 years ago. Bomb. I'm going to vomit. All right. I am a sophomore in college in 2015. I was grieving a painful friendship breakup from the year prior. I was grieving the loss of my high school friend group breaking up. 2 of my besties lived far away. My bestie that lived on campus was working all of the time. And so it's safe to say that I was lonely, super lonely. And I decided that I was going to join a sorority. I got a job on the university's campus housing. And I had some community, but I didn't have the meaningful closeness that I was really craving. I wanted deeper connection. I thought that by joining a sorority, that the meaningful bonds would just basically fall into my lap. But this is actually where my unsuccessful method of creating a best friendship was truly unleashed. Now, side note. I have an idea of doing an episode on how sororities can change things to actually be more connective. Let me know if that's something you would be interested in. But anyway, back to the story. So, 2015, after months of being lonely at college and months of attending events and wondering how the heck some girls were already so close, questioning what was wrong with me that I didn't have the meaningful bonds that I wanted yet. And I was just tired of it. I was tired of being confused, and I was tired of being lonely and not having the bonds that I wanted. So I was determined to create another best friendship or 2, a best friendship or 2. And so I was like, okay, we're really going to go for this. I'm really determined to do this. And for some damn reason, I thought that friendship was knowing everything about each other, and that is what brought closeness. Now, probably, this idea of friendship being, everything about each other, this was probably influenced by my fearful avoidant attachment style at the time. But I really thought that closeness came from complete transparency and knowing each other's deep hurts and just the deepest, rawest version of vulnerability. I thought that's what created trust. And that knowing each other's stories, like knowing each other's stories and deep hurts does create some trust, but not really when that's all you have. So I started asking for girls in the sorority to go out for coffee dates. And we would get so deep with each other and just like share it all, like emotional girl powwow, unregulated therapy session. And we would share our traumas, share our current pains, share how we feel with our partners and with our families. And one of those girls and I that we had a coffee date with, one of the girls that I had a coffee date with, we literally spent 6 hours and bounced around from all the way from lunch to like a late night dessert talking about all these things. Now, remember this 6-hour trauma dumping date for later, okay? Foreshadowing! So then imagine my freaking confusion, my frustration and sadness when these trauma dumping friend dates didn't turn into best friendships. Like it hurt. Oh, it hurt. The thoughts of what was wrong with me just kept getting louder. I got graspier and a bit needier, and I was like, why aren't you my friend? Meh. I had that kind of energy. And sometimes I would just avoid people altogether for a week and just isolate, shut down, not talk to anyone, not respond to any messages at all. And then after that like week of me doing that, then I would bounce to another girl in the sorority. So like, okay, it just didn't work with that person. I'm going to try with another person or two. And then I would do that and repeat the process. So if you're listening to this and maybe you're like me and you appreciate deep conversations and you're like, well, why didn't that work, Jewel? Like, why didn't that work? I'm going to tell you. Because closeness is not just knowing each other's painful stories. Connection, meaningful connection, closeness, it comes from 3 things, okay? And huge thank you to Shasta Nelson for putting this research together. So every friendship ever has 3 things. You might remember this from episode 2, where I told my best friends how I made them my best friends. Just so fun. But anyway, every friendship ever has 3 things. They have consistency, meaningful moments, and vulnerability. So, a little quick refresher. I want you to imagine a triangle. Those things make up a triangle. Meaningful moments are on the bottom of the triangle. And then you deepen a bond with somebody as they go up the triangle through consistency and then through vulnerability. So as you increase consistency and vulnerability with somebody, you move someone up the triangle, you get closer with them, you develop a deeper bond, they become more of a priority, you make a best friend, etc. And this works for dating and everything as well. So if you really think about those 3 things, and maybe I should explain those a little bit more in depth in case you didn't listen to the second episode, so that's what I'm going to do. If you're like, consistency, what the heck does that mean? So consistency can be really broken down to frequency and history. This is, a lot of people will say to me, well, I don't have to make a lot of time for my friends because my best friend and I only talk like twice a year. She's my best friend. Like, I feel so close to her. And I'm like, amazing, beautiful, cover girl. You also have so much history built up with that person. One of my closest friends is my roommate from college, and that bond is so deep. But that was because we spent hours upon hours living together, eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, going to bed together, studying, all of these things together, right? We have so much history. So I could feel really close to her and not see her all the time. Now, granted, she's amazing at keeping up with people, but I digress. So, history, right? Consistency, that other component of frequency. This is why so many of us become so close to our coworkers. We see them every day. So with new friendships, we have a lot of frequency, can really speed up the bond. We can really become deeper. And the combination of those 2, the consistency, is what really deepens a relationship. Now, we're going to be talking more about vulnerability later, but just to kind of premise it now, vulnerability is really 2 people feeling like safe and seen, right? It's 2 people knowing more about each other. So even like if you invite a coworker over to your house after work, that's vulnerable because they're seeing you outside of work in your home. They're getting to see more of you, get familiar with more of you, get to know more of you. That's really what vulnerability is here. And as we increase consistency, as we have meaningful moments with people, foundation at the bottom, which is actually so important because a lot of times people will have people at the top of their triangle and not feel really close to them. And it's because meaningful moments. I'll get into that in a later episode. Ignore it. But so yeah, we'll be talking more about vulnerability in a second, but that's a little mini refresher. Now, if you think about what I was doing with these people, I was focusing on just the vulnerability piece. And even that, I was only focusing on vulnerability through one dimension. Vulnerability is not just seeing each other's painful stories, right? It's getting to see more of each other. It's just sharing more and more of yourself and getting to see more and more of the other person. Also, being trauma dumped on and asked about can feel invasive and genuinely trigger people. And what I mean by trigger is what Katie Kurtz, who is a licensed clinical social worker and has been teaching about trauma-informed space holding for years, what she taught me is that being triggered, being activated is really just too much, too fast, too soon kind of sensations. And when we just jump into somebody who's maybe towards the bottom of our triangle, who we don't have a lot of consistency, vulnerability, or meaningful moments built up with, and we just jump in with the trauma that we have, that can really feel like too much, too fast, too soon. Makes sense, right? Now, we don't need to go all perfectionistic about vulnerability, but I really want to offer that incremental vulnerability, is what we need to aim for. So on these coffee dates that I was doing, I could have just asked them more about themselves and what they were comfortable with sharing. I could have had us do an activity, getting coffee, yes, but I could have had us, go on a walk, maybe play tennis. I could have had us do other things, right? And if people were comfortable sharing their more intimate stories, and honestly, a lot of women are really comfortable getting really emotional, they really enjoy it. If they were comfortable sharing their more intimate stories, awesome. Now, earlier I said there are 4 types of vulnerability. And Shasta Nelson says that they are new ways of interacting, new places, one-on-one, in a group, outside of work, for example, with a coworker. So new ways of interacting, new areas of conversation with respect and openness and honesty. And it is vulnerable to open up about insecurities and areas of shame. That is one. And then the last one is sharing celebrations and pride. Right? As women, we often are really comfortable with that type of vulnerability. It's interesting, right? So, again, I was going at it from a very one-dimensional level of vulnerability. I was just focusing on vulnerability. I wasn't really applying these 3 things that really create meaningful connection, the connection formula, if you will. And before I get into how I created a best friendship, I also need to tell you about what else was blocking me from the meaningful bonds that I wanted. First of all, I really blocked myself. I had a lot of thought, feeling, and behaviors that I was doing where I just blocked myself from the meaningful bonds that I so desperately wanted. So, in other words, I had my own individual barriers to applying the 3 connection necessities. But I also really want to mention that there are cultural and structural barriers to deep, meaningful bonds. Okay? PBS reports that loneliness has been steadily increasing since the 1970s. A deep dive is coming on all of this soon, but y'all, we used to live in villages and in groups. And instead of relaxing in front of the TV or with TikTok in our hands, we used to meander over to a park or a bowling alley or a bar, like in How I Met Your Mother, right? That used to be the normal. We had these third places where we would go, third places between work and home. And now, a lot of us work remotely, alone. And there's also like the societal pressures and the risk, like men have a really hard time being vulnerable because it's such a huge risk for them. And women have been taught that marriage is more important than their friendships, that marriage, means women are more worthy if you are married. Like, woo! Like, there are just a lot of cultural and structural barriers to the deep, meaningful bonds that we all want, right? And I want to advocate for that, recognize that, and just honor that for a second, y'all. Like, this used to be easier for like our grandparents, if you will. They had church built into their lives. They had, like, my grandparents had the bowling alley where they would go, I don't even know, like 3 times a week. They, like, were very involved with their neighborhood, stuff like that. Like, and my grandparents were like kind of older for grandparents as well. So this used to be really easy for them. This was really built into their lives. And it's not really for us. Like, connecting with other humans and being a part of a village, like this connection formula, this triangle, is not really built in for us. So let's just recognize that and take a breath, And it's just as of equal weight that if you don't have the meaningful bonds that you want right now, it does not mean anything about your worthiness. I should be able to restart that. So whoever's editing this, I'm restarting that. Take a breath, and then if you don't have the meaningful bonds that you want right now, it does not mean jack shit about your worthiness. The US Surgeon General says that we are in a loneliness epidemic, okay? Your brain might think when you're feeling lonely, like that it's just you loser, but it's really not. These cultural and structural barriers, they still impact me today. They impact all of us, right? And it's a huge reason why I really wanted to create this podcast. Like, I didn't hear anyone abundantly talking about the cultural and individual barriers to meaningful connection and how to talk about how to create meaningful connection in our modern world and how to enjoy socializing when the world is overstimulated and burnt out and running wild. So anyways, super important to note. Again, take that breath. Just let your shoulders drop. It's not you. It's not you. And of equal weight, I say this because, yes, there are things we need to change. And, again, of equal weight, y'all, we can create more meaningful connections now. And it'll be one of the most fulfilling things that we ever do for ourselves. And y'all, I created my best friendships, the relationships I was craving for so long that I was literally like just wish for. I created those in 2020 in a damn global pandemic. So should this be easier structurally and culturally? Yeah. But there are things that we can do. And my goal is to help empower you to do that. So back to that. Let's talk about my individual barriers that got in my way. Because as I mentioned earlier, I was graspy. I was like also wondering what the heck is wrong with me that I don't have these friendships that I want yet. And so I want you to imagine another triangle. Can you see it? Okay, good. Now, unlike the connection triangle, this triangle, like, it doesn't matter which point is on top or whatever. There's just 3 points, okay? And the points on this triangle are thoughts about myself, thoughts about others, and thoughts about relationships and socializing. Super simple. So my individual barriers were a lot of these thoughts. So for myself, like the thoughts about ourselves, I'm going to redo that. So these mentalities, these buckets, these thoughts about myself, about others, about friendships and socializing, this is what really got in my way. So just to dissect it further, thoughts about myself, that little bucket, thoughts about ourselves, one way I really want you to think about it is that the way we relate to ourselves, is the way we relate to others. I had overly high expectations of myself to be perfect, and I had these expectations for friends too. I had a lot of ridiculous resentment build up, and whenever I didn't create a new bestie, I would just drown myself in shame and be like, it's because I'm not good enough, and they all think I'm weird, and they can secretly see it, and they're just not telling me. So we'll be talking a lot more about this on future episodes, but this is what made it really, really, really hard to connect with other people. Because honestly, y'all, I had meaningful relationships. I had besties at the top of my triangle. Like I had people there. But I didn't feel connected to them because of how I didn't feel connected to myself, because of how disconnected and shamey I was to myself. Right? So this is such a huge barrier, what prevents us from feeling connected to others. Now, the other bucket of thoughts about others, this is so common. It wasn't just me, but I was definitely doing this. I would think about how others just didn't care and how I didn't trust them. And I hear this so often. This one is huge. We can think that other people are judgmental, and maybe because we are noticing how much we judge others, so we assume that they are too. And we might think that other people don't want to make new friends, or that the other people around us, they're just not our ideal friends. In other words, the other people around us just aren't enough of what we want in our friends. Right? So our thoughts about other people can also really get in the way of applying the 3 necessities of feeling connected to others in general. Lastly, the friendship and socializing bucket, we can think that socializing is dreadful, that it's just not fun. And I'm not saying that introverts have to leave here and become obsessed with socializing, but we also don't need to think that it's just the most painful thing in the whole world in general, like whether you're introverted or extroverted, like we can not think that. But for a lot of people in this bucket, one thing I'm constantly talking to my clients about is that they think, friendships are hard to create as an adult. And that going and applying these 3 necessities to a meaningful connection is going to be dreadful. And I mean, who wants to do something that's hard and effortful? If you think that friendships are hard and effortful, why would you want to apply these 3 necessities to deep, meaningful bonds? Now, if you are listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, that's me, I would do you a disservice if I didn't mention that I can help you wrangle these thoughts and shift to a more connected mentality. So if that's something you're interested in, sign up for a consult for my one-on-one program. The link will be somewhere in the show notes, but and I also got to say, especially because we are talking about trauma today, disclaimer, I am trauma informed, but I'm not qualified to dive deep into past traumas. So there's a difference between trauma informed and trauma therapy. I do not do trauma therapy. Anyways, so years later, I blew my own mind with how fun applying friendship science is, because, y'all, I had so much joy in being me. I was able to have such a connective view of others, and applying these 3 things, applying consistency, meaningful moments, and vulnerability to my relationships was truly fun. So fun. And so remember that 6-hour trauma dumping friend date that I went on in 2015? Remember that? Well, years later in 2020, I made that girl that I went on that friend date with, I made her one of my best friends. Yeah, I did. She's probably listening. Hey! So I share all of the tea on how I reconnected with her in episode 2.
which, like, by the way, aren't my friends so damn cute? And if you're like, oh my gosh, awesome. So how did I create my best friendship, and how can you create your next best friendship? Well, I kind of already gave it away with increasing consistency, meaningful moments, and vulnerability with people and moving them up your triangle. We'll be talking more about the ins and outs of this as we go on. But as I said that, did I hear any of you deflate just now? Did I hear that? You were like, ugh, I don't want to do that work? Your thoughts about making friends peering in here? I hear it. So hold up. Before you start thinking that this is a lot of work to make a best friend, I want to offer that the process really can truly be fun, energizing, and you can speed it up. So buckle up. Your new connection coach is going to drop some homework for you. My 3 biggest hacks. I don't really love that word, but my 3 biggest hacks for creating meaningful bonds. Now, I have found some articles that support this, but honestly, this is just my hypothesis after literally years of studying this. Years and years, even without my degrees. And I have over 4,000 hours of coaching individuals on this, which, like, to put it in perspective, like, you need less than 4,000 hours in a lot of states to be, like, to get licensed for some things. So anyway, this is my very informed hypothesis. So, hack 1, create connection in your mind. Put your connection lenses on. This is what makes it really fueling, and this is what allows you to be really patient, because we also know that it takes about 200 hours to create a best friendship. Now, again, some of you might hear that and maybe like, oh, friendship's hard. I don't want your shoulders to deflate. Perk up, right? We're going to make it easier. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fulfilling. All right? Because when you create connection in your mind, it's so energizing. One thing, and I did this a lot when I was going through my journey of I really wanted, like, new best friendships. And I did this a lot where I would look for, where were those moments that we connected with after, like, okay, I'm going to redo that part. I did this a lot when I was going through this process of creating meaningful best friendships, and I was really going on this journey of creating new best friendships. I didn't create them, I didn't birth them, but when I was creating these new best friendships, I did this a lot. And I would create connection in my mind where I would, before going to see them, I would think about how much I appreciated them. I would think about the last time we hung out and how connected we were. I would think about all of these things that would allow me to feel more connected to that person before I even went and saw them. I would, just even randomly in the car, just be thinking like, oh my gosh, like, I wonder how this is going for her. And I'm so excited for our plans. Like, I would create this connection in my mind. And this is what fueled me to do things like keep asking to hang out, to initiate, to check in, to be bold enough to be like, hey, do you want to make a routine of seeing each other and see each other like every week? I was able to do this because I was fueling myself with thoughts of connection. Now, some of you are going to be hearing this and be like, oh my gosh, but like, that sounds like a lot of work. It's really not. It didn't have to go and be like, oh my God, we're going to be best friends. It started off small. Like, I love how this person, really saw me and really heard me out last time we were together. Like, looking for those moments and just appreciating them. That's all it is. And it's so fueling. And connection is such an upward spiral, y'all, because once you are doing that, you just do it more and more, and it becomes more of a thought habit. It becomes more of something you look for. And when we are lonely, that is what we really, really need. And that is what is fueling to help us keep taking action in our friendships. So that's hack 1. Hack 2. I really took the friendship triangle and I was like, okay, how can I really speed this up? And I call this hack meaningful time invested. So I knew it took about 200 hours to make a best friendship. Excuse me. So even in a global pandemic, I was like, okay, how can I speed this up? How can I deepen bonds? And so I was bold and was like, hey, let's go on a girls' trip. And we all took COVID tests. We rented an Airbnb, a little staycation. And that was a lot of hours and a lot of vulnerability, seeing how somebody gets ready for bed, seeing somebody in their pajamas, all doing all of these things. Like, that's vulnerability. And it created a lot of consistency, that a lot of time was really invested there. We had a lot of meaningful moments and laughs and talks and games. And oh my gosh, it was so much fun, truly. It was so fun. So I did things like that. I planned things where we would have to be together for an all day kind of thing. And I also, like I kind of hinted at earlier, I made it so that way we could have routines every week. But really, that meaningful time invested is okay, how can I make sure we spend a long time together, like an all day thing or a girls' trip? And that way I can really accumulate those meaningful hours, the meaningful time invested hours. I feel like I kind of explained that all over the place, but I just got excited. And that's what happens when I have ADHD. I get excited and it's like, bah, 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 bah. Anyway, that's what meaningful time invested is it's really logging the hours, if you will, in those friendships. And it's so fun. So I did things like that. I built in routines. So and if you're oh my gosh, what are all day things? You would be surprised. Long day, festival events, things like that. Lots of moments for this. And if you're okay, well, why does that really matter when it comes to connection? Your brain needs familiarity and it needs consistency and time together to really truly feel safe. It needs to really know this person. And so when you have a lot of time together, it allows your brain to get on board with that. And honestly, this is literally, for the most part, how I created my dream friendships in the pandemic. So those are 2 hacks. Did I only have 2? Oh, I kind of combined them. Okay, and the last one for really speeding this up is really logistical. Again, building in routines where you are seeing this person weekly, every other week, and you would be surprised how often people are totally down to do that. Oh, do you want to go on a walk with me every week? You'd be so surprised. Do you want to go to yoga with me every week? And if I couldn't do that and they were like, oh no, I can't do a weekly thing, I would be like, okay, great. When I'm with you and I'm hanging out with them, I would be like, awesome, when's the next time we can get together? Because a lot of times, and I hear this all the time, people will be like, I reached out, but it just didn't happen. No, people are overstimulated and busy, y'all. And responding to a text and planning out the logistics of everything, everybody gets kind of clogged up in that. So take the logistical struggle, out of it and be like, hey, when's the next time I can hang out with you? No need to go back and forth and do the logistic stuff of that. I'm also saying this because as somebody with ADHD, I really struggle with that logistical struggle. And it's one thing I really had to work on embracing, which my clients know. There's a module on it in the program, but yeah, so those are my 3 hacks. And also that's the story. That's the story of how I tried to trauma dump my way into a best friendship, why it didn't work, and how the heck I did create my best friendships. So yeah, I told you it was going to be slightly embarrassing, slightly sad, but with a really happy ending, right? So if you have any questions for me about this, if there is something that you want me to talk about next, put it in the comment box or send me a DM because I really, really want to know. And with that being said, I encourage y'all to go out there and apply these hacks, create a routine, put on your connection filter, create some meaningful time invested, log those hours, and go practice like different kinds of vulnerability, new conversations, new ways of interacting, celebrating. Right? Meaningful bonds don't just happen to us, we create them. But when we are confident in ourselves, we feel confident in others, that creation process can truly be one of the most fulfilling and fun things that you ever do. And connection, it's such a gift. And it's a gift that literally we all are craving right now. And it's a gift that you deserve. So go treat yourself to some connection, right? Enjoy. And I will see you next time.
Thanks for joining me on the Socially Delightful podcast. I'm Jewel, and I'm truly so grateful that you came and hung out with me today. If this podcast meant something to you, it would mean so much to me if you left me a review so that way I could keep making content that you love. And if you really want to make my whole day, share this podcast to your Instagram story and tag me at Connection with Jewel so I can shout you out. Or send me a message and let me know what resonated with you or what you want to hear next. And I'll see you at the next episode.